Late last year, the Warowl and FMPone both released new maps. These are not what you'd consider finished. Their layouts are functional, but visually they're still in a primitive, dev-textured state. They have a lot of similarities. Both were developed by high-profile people from within the Counter-Strike community. Both were done in just a few days, and both projects were made for fun. Because the last thing you want is to be tied to a commitment that people will pester you about forever. You can download both from the workshop and play them for yourself. I don't know anything about FMPone's map that can't be gathered from stalking him on Twitter. Seems he wants to focus on experimenting with unique bomb sites, and he started the design with this sketch on a piece of paper. Being a highly experienced mapper, I think he just wanted a judgment-free way of experimenting with some fun ideas that he's had, without the usual worries about how competitively viable it is, or how literally unplayable a corridor would become if a pro player was to lock it down. The result of however he made it is a small map, taking just seconds to go from one site to the other, and a lot of it's set at slightly off or 45-degree angles, which can be quite disorienting at first if you're used to CSGO's typical square designs. A lot of what makes this map unique will be how those sections join with the standard segments. The shortest way between the bomb sites is to traverse this water-logged room. No doubt your footsteps will give away your position, but in an unusual twist, he's added a narrow ledge around the sides, so with some clever movement, it might be possible to pass this region quietly. I also notice a lot of verticality, with plenty of windows and platforms to jump off from. On the B side of the map, you can make it quite a long way if you nail the first jump from the ledge. And players are even encouraged to stand on top of bombsite A. I've not been such a rebel since Compound. Since this map's release, he's updated it quite a few times now, and it's beginning to get some basic textures. From my experience, I like how maps look before they're textured. I see he's used light grey and white colours which reflect a lot of light, giving the environments a warm, friendly glow and good visibility. I find it hard to keep this simplicity in my maps when I begin detailing, and often prefer how they looked before I started trying to make them look like a real place. Inevitably it has to be done, but it can take a lot of messing about before it looks as visually pleasing as it did before it was textured. Often, I'd feel like I had done a good job, but booting up an earlier version would remind me of how hard it is to one-up a simple, untextured map. Anyway, best of luck to FMPone with whatever he chooses to do with this, if anything. Now on to Warowls, which is probably more interesting to cover because he shared a lot more of its development with us in the form of a YouTube video. In it, he says he made the map because he wanted to be creative, and to make something fun for competitive 5v5. Both good reasons if you ask me. He went about developing the map's layout in an unusual way. He traced a few of the existing maps that he thinks play well, then from this designed his own in the form of an overhead map layout. He seemed to really enjoy it, and it's always great to see somebody enjoying something creative like this. I personally have never developed a map in this way, or at least never got far with any that I planned like this. Over the years I've been sent many map overviews, usually drawn on paper, and have been asked to say how they'll play. But I can't do this. In my opinion, most CSGO maps look quite similar from the overhead view. If I told you to think of your favourite Counter-Strike map, I could impress you with my psychic abilities by drawing the CT spawn here, the T spawn here, one bomb site here, and the other here. Maybe some kind of mid-route, and then by connecting them all up with lots of corridors like this. And there you have it. Any 3-lane map from the game. Judging a map from an overview is like judging a movie from a summary. You can probably tell if it's going to be bad or if there's something glaringly wrong with it. But you can't distinguish between an okay one and the best ever. That comes from the execution, and from the details that aren't visible from that summary. In Counter-Strike's case, height makes a large difference to how a map plays, and is something you can't get a feel for from a radar overview, not even a detailed one. There's never a substitute for being there in game to study the locations and angles. I would always develop my map layouts in 3D, preferably with walls, since where they are and how tall they are also impact how the map feels. The Warowl got his 2D design, made it in the editor, and then varied the heights of the different areas, added the walls and began playtesting. When should you start playtesting a level? The answer is, the sooner the better, and for him to get to that stage within a single day is good. You don't want to get too attached to what you've already made. You should have no loyalty to it until you know how it feels to play it in game. By all means plan it, but judge it only after playtesting. And you can't just perfect one bit of the level before moving on to the next. Change one area and it changes how the rest of the map plays, so be ready to go back and forth between parts in one of the longest games of whack-a-mole you've ever played. Parts which used to be okay may now need changing. In particular, bomb sites on my maps would go through large adjustments, or even total redesigns, before I was happy with them. As hated as they may be, I like playtesting with bots. They are, after all, how most community-made maps will be played. Bots are good for getting a feel for where the teams will meet, and I will often learn a lot from how they play, especially when they catch me out with their odd positioning or timing. For each major version my maps go through, I use bots to polish off the rough edges, but then move to actual people for the real experience. It's easier said than done though. It's difficult to get enough people together on a custom map for a match to be played. But the Warowl managed this, and in his first match on his new map, drew on both teams, which bodes well for the map's balance. But before he can be sure, he will need to play many, many more games on it. He will need to know how it feels to draw on it, to win on it, and perhaps most importantly, what it's like to be utterly defeated. Is his map still enjoyable when he's dying every round? Desperate games lead to desperate strategies and ridiculous plays. Most will fail, but it's at times like this that overpowered strategies emerge, and the map might require adjustments to balance for them. And if it's hard enough to get a server full of people, it's harder still to get a server full of people already familiar with playing your map. It's harder than you might think to playtest your map in a competitive setting. You can see Mirage's influence in middle. It's got a window for CTs to use, boxes for terrorists to hide behind, a route leading off to A, and a raised half going to B. It doesn't have the underpass though. Bombsite A has a raised platform to indicate where the bomb should be planted and has a high-up indoor approach that terrorists will come from. I get a feeling that Mirage might be Warowl's favourite map. There's no overwhelmingly well-covered spot to plant at. You'll really need situational awareness of which routes the enemies could be coming from to survive the plant. Bombsite B is set in some kind of ruins, which when used in conjunction with a spot of parkour lets you reach this crow's nest. CTs have this powerful indoor room to defend it, but terrorists have 3 separate entrances to attack it from. I'm always sad when CT spawn gets neglected after the round begins, but in this map it serves as the safest route between the sites, and so we'll probably see a lot of use. A bit of the video that stood out to me was when he said,
"This is not how you make a map. I actually don't know what I'm doing. I'm just having fun."
Which is funny to me, because he's made a map that people are playing on. If that doesn't count, then what does? I hope he said it as a joke, and not because he's afraid that if he doesn't put himself down, then other mappers will feel the need to do so. Because any mapper worth listening to will know that there's more than one way to make a map. If somebody does something and it produces a good map, then good for them. I know I've criticised the 2D overview sketch method of planning a map. It's not to say a good map couldn't be made from that method. It's just not enough information to judge a map from. In fact, many of Counter-Strike's official maps were made within days, from mappers who probably had weeks of experience with the game. Dust 2 was made without even knowing where the bomb sites were going to be. At one point, there was going to be a bomb site in a cave in middle. So you're wrong, Warowl. You have made a map. It isn't how I'd have done it, but so what? If you're watching this video hoping to learn how to make a good, balanced map, I hope you walk away from here less confident than when you started. Balanced doesn't exist. It's an illusion. A bourgeois construct. A map's balance will always vary depending on the players, the teams, what they've had to eat that day, and what their favourite colour is, and so on. The best you can hope for is to develop a map that has one-sided games for both sides. You want for it to sometimes be CT-sided, and other times T-sided. Even decades after its release, Dust 2's balance is still changing as strategies, weapon balances, and metas develop. So don't trust anyone who can confidently state how good a map is. There will be people who will judge the map's quality after a single game. Others, a single round. I've seen people join the server, get killed, moan about how one-sided the map is, and then leave again. And if you're unlucky enough to have a famous person do this to your map, you're doomed. People like confidence, even misplaced confidence, and a bad word from the wrong person could doom your map forever through no fault of your own. I have only gotten less confident about my own ability to judge a map as I've learned more, though I still make the mistake of assuming confident people know something that I don't. It's one of those things that, as a map developer, you've got to be careful of. Even when I had invested hundreds of hours into it, a passing comment from a player would make me question my decisions and the quality of my work. With hindsight, I think I was in a better position to judge it than anybody else was. As well as having played so much on my own map across so many iterations, I was also passionate, excited and enthusiastic about it. I don't think you can ask more than this from a map maker. So my advice to the Warowl is to play his map as much as he can, to listen to feedback, to consider changes, but to always weigh it up against what he wants from his level. I find my maps eventually developed a feel to them. It was kind of like a personality that I could use to quickly measure new ideas up against to see if they fitted. It served as a useful filter to the suggestions my map received. It's hard to describe what I mean, but it was as though my map boiled down to a few key elements that I would refuse to change. I just didn't know what they were until I got a suggestion to change them. Don't mistake that for me being stubborn, because there were some people who I swear shared my vision for my map. They'd suggest big changes that I had never even considered, but when I heard them I immediately thought, yeah, that sounds good, as though they were solutions to problems I didn't even know my map had. You might as well be open to experimentation. The only way to know for sure if something else is better is to try it, and you can always revert it if it doesn't work. But whatever happens to the Warowl's map, he has to have the final say. It's his map after all, and I respect that. Who would I be to try and change it to mine? A mapper must also know when to stop. A map is never truly finished, merely iterated on until the developer moves on for whatever reason. There's this idea that if you keep working on something, then it'll get better and better, as though it's somehow approaching perfection. But I'll tell you now, I don't think there is a perfect layout. Apart from Dust 2. If your map is fun and its layout is interesting, maybe it's best to leave it at that and to start on another one. When I used to make music, I could work on the same track for months. It would change and change. I think it was getting better. But when I look back at older versions, I'd realise that there were bits that they did better, and that the newer versions weren't improving, they were simply different. From the effort that I had invested into that one song, I could have made several different songs of the same quality. One of the reasons I've made this video is because a lot of you have contacted me telling me I should collaborate with the Warowl to make his map better. No, I'm not going to do that, because it's a big undertaking, and I prefer working on my own and having control of everything. But also because I think the Warowl has done what he set out to do. Hopefully he's caught the mapping bug and will want to develop more in the future. And if he wants advice, I'll happily give it to him. But once he's happy with his map layout, the next step will be to detail it. And I personally hate detailing maps. It's by far the most time-intensive part of the process, and it achieves the least. I want to make a map that people enjoy playing on. That's what got me into it in the first place. In the time it takes to create a 3D model of a chair, I could have beautifully decorated a whole room from pre-made assets. And in the time it takes for me to do that, I could have developed a complete, untextured map. Guess which of those three things yields the most gameplay? And yet, when mapping, I find that most of my time is spent bogged down in adding trims and props and optimizing everything to keep frame rates acceptable. At no point is any of this necessary for the map to be fun. It just gets in the way of the process for me. People take a good map for granted, but it takes so much time and effort, so many iterations to make even a small section look good. And even when you do, people will hunt out and talk about its flaws. It's thankless. That's not to say that you can't enjoy detailing a map. A good looking map is something to be proud of, but to make mapping about the superficial is to miss the heart of what mapping is. Unfortunately, that's what the reality is. There's so much competition these days that you have to spend months detailing your map to even hope to get people to play on it. Even then, I suspect many will rate a map from the screenshots, or map overview, without even setting foot on it. These days, the standard of mapping is so high that you need custom assets and a team of talented people to even hope of producing a map worthy of being included in the game. And even then, is it worth it? From my years of hosting community maps, the toughest bit of it was getting people to play on them. I couldn't believe it. Back in Counter-Strike Source, my favourite thing to do was to hop onto a community server to download a custom map and to explore it with friends. But I think that in recent years, Counter-Strike has become increasingly professional. It's more about winning and being the best than about messing about. And people would rather perfect their skills on an existing map than to waste their time exploring a new one. Even when a map is included in a game, only a fraction remain there for more than a few months. If you want a map, don't do it expecting fame or glory. Do it for fun, for the thrill of learning something new, and to gain an appreciation for what goes into the maps you've spent all those years watching and playing. Do what Warowl and FMPone have done with these maps. There's so much enjoyment to be had from making a map. If you're keen to give it a go, then check out my tutorials, which will teach you the basics.